The verdant canopy of xylos stretched endlessly overhead as Kalen Merith adjusted his makeshift shelter for what felt like the 100th time. 3 months since the crash, and he still couldn't get used to the persistent wetness that seeped into everything. The xenobiologist wiped sweat from his brow and squinted up at the twin suns filtering through the massive leaves above, each the size of small vehicles and glimmering with an otherworldly iridescence. Xylos, a paradise for research, a nightmare for survival. His emergency beacon had long since stopped transmitting, and the last of his preserved rations were dwindling. The Research Coalition wouldn't send another expedition for at least 8 more months. If he was going to survive, he needed to fully embrace this alien environment, dangerous as it was. Kalen gathered his handcrafted spear and sample collection kit before setting out into the jungle. His initial mission, to catalog the unique flora and fauna of this pristine world, had morphed into something more primal: stay alive long enough for rescue. The dense underbrush parted reluctantly as he moved deeper into territory he hadn't yet explored. Strange calls echoed from unseen creatures, some melodic and beautiful, others sending primal chills down his spine. The atmosphere was heavy with exotic scents, sweet nectars, pungent fungi, and the ever-present petrichor from the frequent rain showers. Hours into his expedition, Kalen paused at the base of a massive, spiral-shaped tree where the ground had been freshly disturbed. Something had been digging vigorously, leaving behind a small crater lined with phosphorescent blue soil. At its center lay a pulsating object no larger than his palm. An egg, but unlike any he'd encountered on Xylos thus far. Kalen knelt beside it, scanner in hand, captivated by its shifting opalescent surface that seemed to shimmer between deep azure and vibrant violet. His readings showed unusual thermal patterns and faint but distinct electrical impulses, signs of imminent hatching. As if responding to his presence, the egg's surface began to fracture, thin lines spreading across it like an intricate web. Kalen held his breath as a small portion of the shell lifted away, revealing a tiny eye, alert, intelligent, and a startling golden color that seemed to pierce straight through him. Within minutes, the creature had fully emerged. No larger than a Terran mouse, its body was covered in fine, iridescent scales that caught the light with every tiny movement. For delicate limbs ended in miniature claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. A ridge of what appeared to be protospines ran down its back, and a pair of nubs suggested future wings or specialized appendages. But it was those eyes, overwhelmingly large for its tiny frame, golden and knowing, that captivated Kalen most. "Hello there, little one," he whispered, extending a cautious finger. The creature tilted its head in an almost human gesture of curiosity, then made a soft chirping sound that ended in a melodic trill. When tried to step forward, it stumbled weakly, clearly vulnerable in its newly hatched state. Kalen's scientific training told him to observe, record, and maintain distance. But something deeper, perhaps the months of isolation or some instinctive recognition, made him cup his hands beneath the struggling newborn. "You shouldn't be alone out here," he murmured, noticing how the creature immediately curled toward his body heat. "Neither of us should." He tucked the tiny being into a pocket of his field vest, where it nestled contentedly, and resumed his trek back to camp. By the time Kalen reached his shelter, he'd already decided to call the creature Rorik, a name from an old family story about a small being with unexpected greatness. The following weeks revealed Rorik to be unlike any organism Kalen had studied. Its growth rate defied conventional biology. Within 2 weeks, it had reached the size of a small cat, and its features were rapidly developing. The protospines had extended into a defensive ridge. The nubs on its back had begun to unfold into membrane-thin, wing-like structures, and its formerly delicate claws were now sharp enough to effortlessly slice through the tough outer bark of Xylosian trees. Most remarkably, Rorik displayed an intelligence that bordered on sentience. Kalen had begun thinking of the creature as male. Though he couldn't be certain of its reproductive biology, seemed to understand basic commands, recognized his name, and had even begun to mimic some of Kalen's behaviors, like the methodical way he organized his specimens or his habit of whistling while preparing meals. "You're quite the mystery, aren't you?" Kalen said one evening as Rorik perched on a nearby rock, watching him prepare a stew of local tubers and the fish-like creatures that inhabited the nearby stream. Rorik trilled in response, a sound Kalen had come to associate with contentment before, gracefully leaping down to curl beside the fire. His scales, now a mesmerizing blend of deep blue and violet, reflected the flames in hypnotic patterns. What had begun as scientific curiosity was evolving into companionship. In the vast wilderness of Xylos, they had become an unlikely family of two, the stranded scientist and his increasingly extraordinary ward. But as Rorik entered his second month, concerning changes began to manifest. His previously omnivorous appetite shifted decidedly carnivorous. The playful pouncing that had once been endearing now carried lethal precision. And one morning, Kalen awoke to find Rorik returning to camp with blood on his muzzle, dragging the carcass of a creature nearly twice his size. That same day, Kalen observed another disquieting development. When startled by a falling branch, Rorik had whirled toward the sound, his body instinctively shifting into an aggressive stance. For just a moment, his scales had flared out like razor-edged armor, and his friendly golden eyes had narrowed to predatory slits. The gentle companion had momentarily transformed into something primitive and dangerous. "What are you becoming?" Kalen whispered that night, watching Rorik sleep. The creature was now the size of a large dog, his muscular body no longer displaying any hint of the vulnerable hatchling he'd found. As if sensing Kalen's gaze, Rorik opened one eye, and for an instant, Kalen could have sworn he saw an apologetic understanding there, as if the creature comprehended its own transformation and the concern it caused. It was during his fourth month on Xylos that Kalen first encountered evidence of indigenous intelligence. While tracking one of Rorik's increasingly lengthy hunting excursions, he discovered a series of intricate markings carved into a ridge of purple stone, too deliberate to be natural, too complex to be coincidental. Further exploration revealed well-maintained paths through otherwise impenetrable vegetation and the occasional glimpse of structures high into massive trees, platforms and shelters woven seamlessly into the natural architecture of the forest. The Sylvani revealed themselves 3 days later. Kalen had been collecting water when 5 figures emerged silently from the surrounding foliage. Tall and lithe, their skin bore the faintest greenish tint, marked with subtle patterns reminiscent of the dappled forest light. Their eyes were large and almond-shaped, in shades of amber, green, and deep brown. Most striking were the branch-like extensions that grew from their temples and shoulders. Not antlers or horns, but something between vegetation and bone, adorned with small, luminescent blooms. They carried weapons, elegant spears and bows that seemed grown rather than crafted, but held them non-aggressively. One stepped forward, regarding Kalen with an expression of intense curiosity mingled with evident wariness. Words flowed from the being's lips, melodic but incomprehensible. Kalen raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said slowly. "I'm not from here." The apparent leader tilted his head, then motioned to another of the group, who produced a small, crystalline object. When activated, it emitted a soft hum. After several exchanges in their language, the device produced sounds Kalen recognized as heavily accented but intelligible standard. "Why do you trespass in the realm of the Sylvani?" the leader asked. "What do you seek in our forest?" Kalen explained his circumstances as simply as possible: his research mission, the crash, his struggle to survive until rescue might come. The Sylvani listened impassively, occasionally exchanging glances or whispered comments among themselves. "Your kind has not visited Xylos in many cycles," the translator finally said. "The last who came brought disease and took samples without consent. The elders remember." "I'm sorry for that," Kalen replied genuinely. "I've tried to live here respectfully, taking only what I need to survive." A tense silence followed, broken by a distant, distinctive call that made Kalen's blood run cold. Rorik, returning from his hunt. The reaction from the Sylvani was immediate. Their weapons raised in unison, bodies tensing as the sound repeated, "Closer now." "You have awakened a shadowed one," the leader hissed, genuine fear in his eyes. The old warnings were true. Before Kalen could respond, Rorik burst into the clearing in a blur of iridescent scales. Now the size of a large wolf, his body had developed a sleek, aerodynamic shape optimized for speed and stealth. The wing-like membranes had grown into functional gliding surfaces, and the defensive ridge along his spine now featured sharp, retractable spines. Seeing the armed Sylvani surrounding Kalen, Rorik dropped instantly into a defensive posture, his scales flaring to reveal their razor edges. A low, resonant growl emanated from deep in his chest, a sound Kalen had never heard before. "No, Rorik, they're not attacking," Kalen shouted, stepping between his companion and the increasingly terrified Sylvani. What followed was a tense standoff. Rorik refused to stand down completely, circling protectively around Kalen while keeping all 5 Sylvani in a sightline. The indigenous group maintained their defensive formation, but something in their demeanor had shifted from wary to genuinely afraid. "You control the shadowed one," the translator finally said, voice tinged with disbelief. "This is unexpected. He's not what you think," Kalen tried to explain, placing a calming hand on Rorik's flank. "He hatched recently. I've been caring for him." The leader shook his head. "The legends speak of such creatures. Devourers of balance. Harbingers of destruction. You have made a grave error in nurturing this being." With that ominous declaration, the Sylvani retreated into the forest, moving with such fluid grace that they seemed to melt into the vegetation. Their parting words lingered behind them. "The council must be informed. The elders will decide your fate." Kalen stood motionless as Rorik gradually relaxed his defensive posture, eventually pressing his head against Kalen's hand with a questioning trill. "I think we've just made first contact," Kalen murmured, scratching behind Rorik's sensory ridges. "And it could have gone better." That night, Kalen made the difficult decision to relocate their camp. If the Sylvani viewed Rorik as a threat, and clearly they did, remaining in the same location seemed unwise. By dawn, they had moved several kilometers deeper into the forest, following one of the small tributary streams that would hopefully provide both water and some protection from tracking. But avoidance proved futile. Within days, Kalen began noticing signs of observation, glimpses of movement at the edge of his vision, the occasional sense of being watched. The Sylvani were clearly monitoring him, though they made no move to approach. As Rorik continued to grow, maintaining secrecy became increasingly impossible. His hunting needs expanded in proportion to his size, and the evidence of his predation, distinctive claw marks, the remains of increasingly large prey, could not be disguised. Kalen found himself in a precarious position, desperately trying to balance Rorik's needs with the necessity of minimizing their impact on what he now understood was someone else's territory. It was during this period of anxious concealment that Kalen first glimpsed Lyra. He was collecting specimens by a small waterfall when movement caught his eye. A solitary figure stood on the opposite bank, observing him with undisguised fascination. Unlike the Sylvani he'd encountered before, she wore elaborate garments woven from what appeared to be living plants, and the branch-like extensions at her temples were adorned with luminescent flowers that pulsed gently with an inner light. She made no effort to hide or retreat when Kalen spotted her. Instead, she raised a hand in greeting and spoke. Her words carried clearly across the flowing water thanks to the unusual acoustic properties of the cavern. "I am Lyra, daughter of Chief Thorn. I would speak with the Starwalker who tames the Shadowed One." To Kalen's amazement, she spoke in near-perfect standard, with only the slightest accent coloring her words. "You speak my language," he called back, setting down his specimens. Lyra nodded. "I'm a keeper of stories. It is my duty to learn the tongues of those who visit our world." She gestured to a narrower section of the stream. "May I cross? I come without weapon or escort." Kalen nodded, watching as she gracefully navigated the stepping stones with practiced ease. Up close, he could see that her eyes were an unusual violet hue, and the patterns on her skin seemed to shift subtly with her movements. Not tattooed or painted, but somehow living. "Our scouts have been observing you," she stated simply. Their reports trouble the council greatly. "Because of Rorik," Kalen guessed. "The creature you call Rorik, yes." She tilted her head. "You named a shadowed one. This is unprecedented." "He's not a threat," Kalen insisted. "Not to you or your people." Lyra's expression remained neutral. "The histories say otherwise. In the time of my great-grandmother's great-grandmother, such creatures brought devastation to the forest heart. Many Sylvani perished before the balance was restored." She moved closer, studying Kalen with evident curiosity. "Yet you control this one. It obeys you, protects you. The hunters who observed your first meeting with our scouts say it could have attacked, but chose restraint. We have a bond," Kalen explained, struggling to articulate the complex relationship he developed with Rorik. "He was just a hatchling when I found him. I've cared for him since." "Show me," Lyra commanded, though her tone was more curious than imperious. Kalen hesitated. "He's hunting. I can't call him back." A gentle smile touched Lyra's lips for the first time. "Yes, you can. If your bond is as you claim, he will sense your need." Skeptical but willing to try, Kalen closed his eyes and focused on Rorik. Their connection, the sense of companionship that had grown between them. He couldn't explain the strange certainty that Rorik would somehow perceive his summons, but he trusted it nonetheless. Less than 10 minutes later, a rustling in the underbrush announced Rorik's arrival. He emerged cautiously, immediately tensing at the sight of Lyra. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. "It's okay," Kalen soothed, placing himself partially between them. "She's not a threat." Lyra's reaction was complex. Initial fear giving way to wonder as she observed Rorik's controlled response to Kalen's reassurance. The creature was now nearly the size of a small horse, his once tiny frame having developed into a sleek, powerful form covered in armored scales that shimmered with deep blues and violets in the dappled light. "Magnificent," she whispered, her voice a blend of awe and lingering apprehension. "And terrible." Rorik maintained his distance, golden eyes fixed unblinkingly on the Sylvani princess, but made no aggressive moves. This standoff continued until Lyra slowly reached into a pouch at her waist and removed what appeared to be a small, glowing fruit. She held it out, not toward Rorik, but toward Kalen. "Give him this," she instructed. "It is sacred to us, sunberries that grow only in the highest canopy where the twin lights touch first at dawn." Kalen accepted the offering and approached Rorik, who sniffed the strange fruit curiously before delicately taking it from Kalen's palm. The effect was immediate and startling. As Rorik consumed the berry, the glowing essence seemed to travel visibly through his body, temporarily illuminating his veins and the undersides of his scales with a golden light. A soft, musical trill escaped him, a sound of pleasure Kalen hadn't heard since Rorik's earliest days. "He responds to the light gift," Lyra observed, genuine surprise in her voice. "The legends say the shadowed ones reject all that is of the light." She studied them both with new interest. "I must report this to the council." "But," she hesitated, "I will speak of what I have witnessed truthfully. Your bond with this creature defies our understanding. This requires deeper reflection." As she prepared to leave, Lyra fixed Kalen with an intense gaze. "The warrior Varric leads those who would destroy your companion without hesitation. He believes strictly in the old ways and views the emergence of a shadowed one as an omen of disaster. His influence with the council is considerable." She gestured at the surrounding forest. "You should remain in this territory for now. I will return when the council has deliberated." After Lyra's departure, Kalen sank down beside Rorik, absently stroking the now contented creature's scales. The situation was growing increasingly complex. What had begun as simple survival had evolved into something far more complicated, a cultural and possibly religious conflict with indigenous people whose world he was ultimately a visitor in. And at the center of it all was Rorik, still growing, still changing, and increasingly mysterious in his nature and capabilities. "What are you really?" Kaelin murmured as Rorik's golden eyes drifted closed, the glow from the sacred fruit still faintly visible beneath his scales. "And what have I gotten us into?" The following weeks brought increasingly frequent visits from Lyra. Each time, she came alone, bringing not only information about the ongoing council deliberations, but also genuine curiosity about both Kaelin and Rorik. Their conversations gradually shifted from tense exchanges to something more akin to cultural exchange, with Lyra explaining the complex spiritual and ecological relationships the Sylvani maintained with Xylos, while Kaelin shared knowledge of the broader galaxy and a scientific understanding of the world around them. Rorik, initially wary of the Sylvani princess, gradually accepted her presence. By her 5th visit, he allowed her to approach without Kaelin's intervention, and by the 8th, he permitted her to touch his scales, an honor previously reserved only for Kaelin. "The council remains divided," Lyra explained during one such visit, as they sat beside a small pool where bioluminescent creatures similar to Terran fish swam in geometric patterns. "Many of the elders are persuaded by Varric's arguments. He cites the ancient warnings and points to the increasing disruptions in the forest harmony." "Disruptions?" Kaelin questioned, looking up from his notes. Lyra nodded gravely. "The great migration of the canopy wings came early this season. Several sacred groves have failed to bloom, and the dream singers report troubled visions." She glanced at Rorik, who was currently investigating a cluster of phosphorescent fungi. "Varric claims these are the first signs of the imbalance that the shadowed ones bring." "That's not evidence," Kaelin argued. "Ecological systems fluctuate naturally. Correlation doesn't imply causation." A small smile touched Lyra's lips. "Your way of understanding the world is fascinating, Kaelin. So precise, so segmented." She gestured at the forest around them. "The Sylvani see all things as connected in the great weave. When one strand trembles, all feel it eventually." She reached out to touch a delicate, spiraling plant, which immediately curled toward her finger as if greeting an old friend. "My father, the chief, listens to all voices. But Varric's faction grows stronger each day. They demand action." "What kind of action?" Kaelin asked, though he already suspected the answer. Lyra's expression grew solemn. "A ritual hunt. The elimination of the shadowed one, and," she hesitated, "the removal of its keeper from our realm." "They want to kill us both," Kaelin stated flatly. "No," Lyra protested, then moderated her tone. "Not death for you. Exile. There are ancient portals at the edge of our territory, remnants of those who came before. They could send you back to the stars." Her gaze dropped. "But yes, for your companion, they seek destruction." Kaelin's mind raced. "We could leave on our own. Go beyond your territory." Lyra shook her head. "Xylos is vast, but the Sylvani are its stewards. There is nowhere on this world where you would not eventually be found." She reached out unexpectedly, her hand cool against his. "And I do not believe flight is the answer. There is purpose in your bond with the Shadowed One, a purpose not yet fulfilled." Before Kaelin could respond, a distant, resonant call echoed through the forest. Not the familiar sound of Rorik's hunting cry, but something more deliberate, a signal. Lyra tensed immediately. "Hunting horns," she whispered, rising to her feet. "Varric has defied the council. He comes with warriors." Rorik had already sensed the danger, his body shifting into a defensive posture, scales flaring to their most intimidating display. Kaelin moved quickly to gather his essential gear, but Lyra caught his arm. "There are too many. Varric is a master hunter, and he has brought the greatest warriors of our tribe." Her violet eyes held Kaelin's with desperate intensity. "You must trust me. There's another way." With no time to argue, Kaelin nodded, signaling Rorik to follow as Lyra led them swiftly through the forest. Her knowledge of the terrain was evident in every choice she made. Hidden paths, natural tunnels formed by massive root systems, stepping stones across streams that left no tracks. The sounds of pursuit occasionally reached them, but always distant, always fading. As they traveled, Lyra explained in hurried fragments. Vera claims to act with the forest's blessing. He has convinced many warriors. They carry weapons enhanced with ancient magics specifically designed to harm the Shadowed Ones. My father would have prevented this, but he is in deep communion with the forest heart, seeking guidance. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a hidden glade dominated by a massive tree unlike any Kalen had seen on Xylos. Its trunk, easily 100 meters in diameter, glowed with a soft internal light that pulsed in a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat. Its branches extended so far upward that they disappeared into the mist above, while its roots created intricate patterns across the glade floor, forming natural archways and chambers. The mother tree, Lyra breathed, her voice filled with reverence. One of the 9 hearts of Xylos. We will be safe here, if only briefly. The sacred ground cannot be violated by weapons or violence. As they approached the massive trunk, Kalen noticed ancient symbols carved into the bark, similar to those he'd first discovered months ago, but far more elaborate and clearly maintained with loving care. Lyra placed her palm against one such symbol, and a previously invisible doorway shimmered into existence, revealing a chamber within the living tree. Enter quickly, she urged. The sanctuary will accept you because you come with me, but it may reject your companion if his nature is truly what Varric believes. Kalen hesitated, looking at Rorik. The creature had grown extraordinarily since those first days. Now the size of a large bear, his evolved form a perfect blend of speed, stealth, and lethal capability. Yet in his golden eyes, Kalen still saw the intelligence and bond that had formed between them. He's not what they think, Kalen said firmly. He'll be accepted. Rorik approached the threshold cautiously, sniffing the air around the entrance. For a tense moment, he seemed reluctant to proceed. Then, with a soft trill of decision, he crossed into the chamber. No resistance, no rejection, just a momentary shimmer of light as the trees. Energy field registered his presence. Relief washed over Lyra's face. The mother tree sees truth beyond legend, she whispered, following them inside. The interior was astonishing, a vast, hollow space illuminated by bioluminescent growths that cast a gentle, azure light throughout. The walls were living tissue, pulsing gently with the same rhythm Kalen had observed outside. At the center stood a crystal formation that resembled an altar, surrounded by pools of clear water fed by condensation from above. Lyra moved to the crystal altar, placing her hands upon it. Here we can speak without fear of being overheard. The sanctuary shields us from sensing magic. Who built this place? Kalen asked, awed by the perfectly formed interior space within the living tree. No one built it, Lyra explained. The 9 hearts grew this way naturally, though over millennia the Sylvani have communed with them, enhancing the natural chambers through mutual exchange. She gestured to the symbols etched into the inner walls. These tell the history of our world, from the arrival of the first ones to the great cataclysms, the rise of the Sylvani, and the promises we made to Xylos itself. Rorik was investigating the chamber with cautious curiosity, occasionally stopping to examine particular symbols with an intensity that struck Kalen as unusual. At one such moment, the creature froze, eyes fixed on a specific section of the wall. A low, keening sound emerged from his throat, not threatening, but somehow mournful. Kalen approached, studying the symbols that had captured Rorik's attention. They depicted beings remarkably similar to Rorik's current form, sleek, powerful creatures with distinctive ridge patterns and what appeared to be gliding membranes. In the imagery, they were shown protecting smaller figures that resembled primitive Sylvani from shadowy, amorphous threats. What is this? Kalen asked, pointing to the tableau. Lyra joined them, her expression thoughtful. The legend of the Guardians, she said slowly. Before my people fully awakened to consciousness, Xylos was threatened by entities called the Void Feeders, beings that consumed life energy and left only emptiness behind. She traced the outline of one of the Rorik-like creatures. According to the oldest stories, the Great Mother created defenders, the Karaka, to protect the emerging life of Xylos. Her gaze shifted to Rorik, who remained fixated on the images. For generations, they stood as guardians against the darkness. But as the Void Feeders were driven back, some of the Karaka themselves became corrupted, turning against those they were meant to protect. These fallen ones became known as the Shadowed Ones in our legends. Kalen looked between the ancient imagery and Rorik, the connections forming in his mind. You're saying Rorik is one of these Karaka, these ancient guardians? I do not know, Lyra admitted. The last of the guardians vanished from our world long before my ancestors' time. It was believed they went into deep slumber, hidden away until needed again. Her hand moved to another section of the wall, where egg-like objects were depicted nestled in the earth. They were said to leave their legacy buried deep, awaiting the proper time to awaken. Rorik suddenly tensed, his head swiveling toward the entrance. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. Moments later, Kalen heard it too, the distant sound of hunting horns, closer now than before. Impossible, Lyra whispered. They cannot track us to a heart. A new sound joined the horns, distant shouts, not of triumph but of alarm and fear. Something else was happening. Lyra placed her hands on the crystal altar, closing her eyes in concentration. After several tense moments, she looked up, her expression grave. Outsiders, she said, voice tight with concern. Metal-skinned beings with weapons of light and destruction. They attack our villages at the forest's edge, taking captives and harvesting samples. Harvesters, Kalen breathed, recognition dawning. Interstellar poachers. They target worlds with unique biological resources, especially endangered species. They seek rare essence, Lyra confirmed, the crystal conveying information to her. And they have detected. Her eyes moved to Rorik, an energy signature unlike any other on Xylos. They hunt your companion. The situation had suddenly grown far more complex. Not only was Varric leading warriors to hunt down Rorik, but a new, technologically advanced threat had emerged, one potentially dangerous to all life on Xylos. We need to warn Varric's hunting party, Kalen said, already gathering his gear. They're not equipped to deal with harvesters. Lyra nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Varric will not easily set aside his hunt, even in the face of a greater threat. His pride and conviction run too deep. Then we make him listen, Kalen replied grimly. Rorik and I will help defend against these harvesters. Actions speak louder than words. Outside the sanctuary, they could now hear the distinct sounds of energy weapons discharging in the distance, a sound all too familiar to Kalen and completely foreign to Xylos. The harvesters were getting closer, likely tracking Rorik's unique energy signature. There's a faster way, Lyra said suddenly, moving to a different section of the wall. She placed her palm against a specific symbol, and a portion of the chamber floor began to reconfigure, revealing a spiraling path downward. The root passages connect all 9 hearts. We can emerge closer to the conflict, descending into the luminous tunnels formed by the massive tree's root system. They moved swiftly through the network. Lyra led confidently, navigating junctions and passages as if following an invisible map. Rorik seemed unusually at ease in these ancient corridors, often moving ahead as if guided by some instinctive knowledge. They emerged from the root system into a small clearing just as chaos erupted around them. Sylvani warriors, armed with their traditional weapons, were engaged in a desperate battle against humanoid figures encased in sleek, metallic exoarmor. The harvesters' weapons, energy-based disruptors designed to incapacitate without killing, preserving valuable specimens, were systematically overwhelming the tribal defenders. At the center of the Sylvani forces stood a commanding figure, taller than the others, with elaborate branch-like extensions forming a crown-like structure around his head. His armor was crafted from living wood that moved fluidly with his powerful frame, and he wielded a staff that crackled with natural energy. Varric, Lyra identified, her voice a mixture of respect and frustration. The greatest warrior of our generation, and perhaps the most stubborn. Kalen assessed the situation quickly. The Harvesters, 6 in total, were employing standard capture tactics, using containment fields to isolate individual Sylvani while systematically tagging them with biotracker implants. They weren't expecting organized resistance, just the typical confusion of a primitive species encountering advanced technology. They're not here to slaughter, Kalen explained rapidly. They want specimens, living examples of Xylos' unique life forms. But they won't hesitate to kill if they feel threatened. As if confirming his assessment, one of the Harvesters activated a hovering scanner that began sweeping the battlefield, its sensors clearly searching for specific biological signatures. When the beam passed over their position, it immediately focused on Rorik, emitting a high-pitched confirmation tone. Primary target located, announced a mechanically enhanced voice. Juvenile apex predator, classification Omega. Priority override. All units converge. Instantly, 4 of the Harvesters disengage from their skirmishes with the Sylvani, activating advanced mobility systems to converge on Rorik's position. Varric, momentarily forgotten, looked up in confusion as his opponents suddenly abandoned their attack. Rorik's response was immediate and terrifying. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, he launched himself directly at the approaching Harvesters. His scales flared to their fullest extent, now resembling razor-sharp armor, and the membranes along his back extended to create an intimidating silhouette twice his already impressive size. The first Harvester fired a containment field, but Rorik moved with unexpected speed, evading the energy net with a grace that belied his bulk. His counterattack was swift and precise, claws that could shred the toughest Xylosian bark slicing through the Harvester's armor as if it were paper. The poacher fell back, environmental suit compromised, and no longer projecting its confident invulnerability. The remaining Harvesters adjusted quickly, switching to more lethal weaponry. Energy blasts scorched the vegetation around Rorik as he weaved through the assault, his instincts and reflexes proving far superior to what the poachers had anticipated from a primitive life form. Kalen didn't hesitate. Drawing the hand pulsar he'd salvaged from his crashed ship, a standard research tool repurposed as a weapon, he joined the fray, targeting the Harvester's sensor arrays and mobility systems rather than attempting to penetrate their armor directly. Lyra, with unexpected ferocity, produced a slender, crystalline rod from her garments. When activated, it extended into a staff similar to Varric's, though smaller and infused with a different energy signature. She moved with practiced skill, using the staff to disrupt the Harvester's technology rather than attack them directly, causing malfunctions in their targeting systems and communication devices. The sudden 3-pronged counterattack momentarily disoriented the Harvesters, who had clearly expected easy prey. This brief advantage allowed Varric and his warriors to regroup and engage from another angle, surrounding the intruders who now found themselves fighting on multiple fronts. But the Harvesters hadn't survived as interstellar poachers without contingency plans. Their leader activated a device on his wrist, and moments later, the distinctive hum of a descending craft shattered the forest canopy above. A sleek, predatory vessel hovered overhead, deploying capture cables and additional armored figures. "They're calling reinforcements," Kalen shouted to Lyra over the escalating chaos. "We need to retreat." Instead of responding, Lyra turned toward Varric, exchanging rapid communications in their native tongue. The warrior leader initially responded with visible anger, gesturing aggressively toward Rorik, who was still engaged with 2 Harvesters simultaneously. Whatever Lyra said next, however, seemed to give Varric pause. After a moment of internal conflict visibly playing across his features, he issued sharp commands to his warriors. The Sylvani immediately shifted tactics, forming a coordinated retreat pattern that drew the Harvesters toward a specific area of the forest. Lyra grabbed Kalen's arm, pulling him in a different direction. "Varric is creating a diversion," she explained hurriedly. "We must reach the stone circle. It's our only chance against their technology." Rorik disengaged from his opponents at Kalen's whistle, reluctantly abandoning the battle to follow them deeper into the forest. Behind them, the sounds of the skirmish continued, but now it was clearly a strategic withdrawal rather than a rout, with the Sylvani leading their pursuers exactly where Varric wanted them. Lyra led them through increasingly dense vegetation until they reached an ancient clearing dominated by massive, weathered stone monoliths arranged in a perfect circle. Each stone bore symbols similar to those in the Mother Tree Sanctuary, but weathered by countless seasons of exposure. The anchoring, Lyra explained breathlessly as they entered the circle. One of the places where the first ones bound the energy of Xylos to specific patterns. Here, the weave is strongest. She moved to the center of the circle where a crystalline formation protruded from the ground, similar to the altar in the tree sanctuary, but clearly more ancient, with veins of pulsating energy visible beneath its rough surface. "What are we doing here?" Kalen asked, keeping a wary eye on the forest around them while Rorik patrolled the perimeter, senses alert for pursuit. Varric believes the Shadowed Ones, the corrupted Karaka, were banished using the power of the stone circles, Lyra explained, placing her hands on the crystal. But the true purpose of the circles was to focus and amplify the Guardian's natural abilities. She looked meaningfully at Rorik. "If he is truly what I suspect, a Karaka Guardian, not a Shadowed One, then this place will awaken his full potential." A distant explosion punctuated her words. The conflict between the Sylvani and Harvesters was intensifying. They had little time. "Bring him to the center," Lyra instructed, her hands beginning to glow where they touched the crystal. Kalen approached Rorik, who was now standing alert at the edge of the clearing, golden eyes fixed on the forest beyond. "Rorik," he called softly, "we need your help." The creature turned, regarding Kalen with an intelligence that seemed to have deepened over their months together. Without hesitation, he approached the center of the circle, taking position beside Lyra at the crystal. "Now both of you, place your hands, or in Rorik's case, his head, against the crystal," Lyra instructed. "The connection must be complete. Guardian, guide, and conduit." Kalen did as instructed, feeling an immediate warmth spread up his arm as he touched the ancient stone. Rorik pressed his scaled head against the surface, and the reaction was instantaneous. The crystal flared with blinding light, and energy patterns ignited along the monolith surrounding them, ancient symbols blazing to life after countless dormant years. A surge of awareness flooded through Kalen. Impressions, emotions, and fragmentary knowledge not his own. He glimpsed Xylos, as it had been millennia ago, saw shadowy entities that devoured life and light, witnessed the creation of the Karaka Guardians from the essence of the planet itself. Most shockingly, he experienced the moment of choice, when some Karaka embraced darkness while others remained true to their purpose. Rorik's consciousness touched his own, and Kalen understood at last. Rorik was indeed a Karaka, but neither guardian nor corrupted. He was something new, born from ancient genetic memory, but bonded to an off-worlder. His development had followed a unique path, unrestricted by the expectations or limitations of the past. The energy built to a crescendo, and Rorik's form began to change. His already impressive size increased until he stood taller than a terrestrial horse. His scales shifted in color, developing patterns of luminous energy that flowed across his armored hide like living circuitry. The membrane structures along his back expanded into full wings capable of true flight, and a corona of energy formed around his head, resembling the branch-like extensions of the Sylvani, but composed of pure, concentrated power. When the transformation completed, Rorik stood majestically in the center of the stone circle, the first fully awakened Karaka that Xylos had seen in thousands of years. His golden eyes, now illuminated from within by the same energy that coursed through his body, regarded Kalen with unchanged affection and loyalty. "It worked," Lyra breathed, awe evident in her voice. "He has awakened." Before they could celebrate this transformation, The sounds of battle reached the clearing, much closer now. Moments later, Varric burst through the vegetation, supporting an injured warrior. Behind him came the remainder of his hunting party, many wounded, but moving with purpose. "The metal skins follow," Varric announced grimly, faltering momentarily at the sight of Rorik's transformed state. Their flying vessel approaches. As if summoned by his words, the harvester ship appeared overhead, its hull breaching the canopy with mechanical precision. Capture cables descended like metallic tentacles, and the whine of charging weapons systems filled the air. Rorik looked to Kalen, a question in those intelligent eyes. "Yes," Kalen said simply. "Protect us. Protect Xylos." With a roar that seemed to reach the very core of the planet, Rorik launched himself skyward, powerful wings carrying him directly toward the hovering vessel. The harvesters, unprepared for an aerial assault from what they had classified as a ground-dwelling predator, responded too slowly. Rorik's empowered claws tore through the ship's external sensor array, while the energy now coursing through his body disrupted its stabilization systems. On the ground, Varric overcame his momentary shock at Rorik's transformation. With a warrior's pragmatism, he recognized the opportunity presented and reorganized his forces to engage the remaining harvesters who had pursued them to the clearing. Kalen joined the counterattack, his hand pulsar proving surprisingly effective now that they were within the stone circle, where the harvester's advanced technology seemed less reliable. Lyra remained at the central crystal, channeling energy through it to strengthen the disruptive field affecting the invaders' equipment. The battle that followed was brief but intense. Overhead, Rorik systematically disabled the harvester vessel's offensive capabilities, moving with impossible speed and precision. The ship, crippled and unable to maintain stability, was forced to make an emergency landing at the edge of the clearing, its crew scrambling to evacuate as systems failed around them. The ground forces, deprived of aerial support and with their technology increasingly unreliable, found themselves outmatched by the combined efforts of the Silvani warriors, Kalen's unexpected assistance, and most significantly, the disruptive energies emanating from the stone circle itself. When the harvester leader, distinguished by his more elaborate armor, found himself cornered by Varric and two other warriors, he triggered an emergency protocol. A blinding flash emanated from his suit, temporarily disorienting his opponents, while a beacon signal called for immediate extraction. "They retreat," Varric announced as the remaining harvesters disengaged, fleeing toward emergency transponders that had appeared at the forest's edge. "But they will return with greater numbers." Rorik landed beside Kalen, his transformed presence commanding awe even from the Silvani warriors who had so recently hunted him. The energy patterns across his scales pulsed in rhythm with the ancient stones surrounding them, confirming his connection to this place and to Xylos itself. Varric approached cautiously, his weapon lowered but not sheathed. He studied Rorik with the calculating gaze of a master hunter, then shifted his attention to Kalen. "The princess spoke truth," he admitted reluctantly. "This is no shadowed one. This is—" He searched for the word, "Karaka reborn." His gaze moved to Lyra, who still stood by the central crystal. "The council must be convened immediately. The return of a guardian changes everything." In the days that followed, the Silvani council gathered in an extraordinary session within the largest of their canopy cities, a breathtaking structure built around and within a cluster of ancient trees whose branches had been gently guided over generations to form natural chambers and pathways. Representatives from all Silvani settlements across Xylos arrived to witness the unprecedented events and participate in the deliberations. Kalen and Rorik were given honored quarters rather than treated as prisoners or threats, a significant shift in status that reflected their role in repelling the harvesters. Even Varric, while maintaining a certain professional wariness, had set aside his earlier hostility in favor of pragmatic alliance. The debate within the council chamber lasted 3 days. Kalen was called to testify about his experiences with Rorik, his understanding of the harvesters and their motivations, and his knowledge of the wider galaxy. Lyra spoke at length about the ancient texts and the revelations at the stone circle. Even Rorik was brought before the assembly, his transformed presence causing a mixture of fear, awe, and rekindled hope among the gathered Sylvani. On the fourth day, the council reached its decision. The chief, Lyra's father, a dignified figure whose branch crown had grown to impressive proportions with age and wisdom, delivered their verdict in the Grand Chamber. Xylos faces threats both ancient and new, he proclaimed, his voice carrying effortlessly through the living architecture. The return of a Kairaka Guardian after countless generations cannot be coincidence. The weave pattern shifts, and we must adapt with it. He gestured to Kaelin and Rorik, who stood side by side before the assembly. The off-worlder Kaelin has demonstrated loyalty to Xylos through his actions. The Guardian Rorik, though bound to him rather than directly to our world, has proven his nature through combat against our enemies. Both have earned the right to dwell among us. A murmur passed through the assembly, approval from many, resignation from some, and lingering doubt from a few. The chief continued, "But this new alliance brings obligations and necessities. The harvesters will return, likely with greater numbers and enhanced weapons. Other threats may yet emerge from beyond our world or from the ancient shadows. We must prepare, and we must ensure the continued loyalty and proper guidance of the awakened Guardian." He turned to Lyra, who stood nearby in her formal regalia, living plants forming an intricate crown around her elegant features, her violet eyes bright with anticipation and an emotion deeper than mere political concern. Therefore, the council proposes a binding, a formal alliance through the sacred union of my daughter, Princess Lyra, keeper of stories and future chief of the Sylvani, with the off-worlder Kaelin, guide of the Guardian. The pronouncement landed with the weight of tradition and inevitability. Kaelin, though he had grown increasingly close to Lyra during the crisis and its aftermath, felt momentarily overwhelmed by the formal, almost contractual nature of the proposal. Lyra stepped forward, addressing both her father and Kaelin directly. "I accept this duty," she said clearly, "but it must be more than duty for it to succeed." She turned fully toward Kaelin, taking his hands in hers. "The bond one offer is not merely political or strategic. In our time together, I have come to value your wisdom, your courage, and your heart. This union would honor not just our people's needs, but my own desire." The honesty in her eyes was unmistakable. What had begun as diplomatic necessity had evolved into genuine connection. Their shared experiences, complementary perspectives, and growing mutual respect laying a foundation stronger than any arranged alliance could provide. Rorik, sensing the importance of the moment, moved closer to Kaelin, his transformed presence both protective and endorsing. The golden eyes that had once looked up at Kaelin from a tiny, vulnerable hatchling now regarded him with intelligence equal to any being in the chamber, and with a loyalty that transcended species or origin. In that moment, Kaelin recognized the truth that had been gradually forming over months of survival, discovery, and conflict. His crash landing on Xylos had never been the temporary setback he'd initially believed. It had been a beginning, the start of a connection to this world, its people, and its ancient guardians that now defined him more fundamentally than his former life ever had. "I accept," he said simply, squeezing Lyra's hands gently, not just as duty or necessity, but with honor and joy. The formal ceremony took place 3 days later at the Stone Circle, where the ancient energies of Xylos could witness and bless the unprecedented union. Representatives from all Sylvani settlements attended, along with a small number of off-worlders from the research outpost that had finally responded to Kaelin's long-dormant beacon, arriving just in time to witness the ceremony rather than effect the rescue they had expected to perform. As vows were exchanged according to Sylvani tradition, adapted to include both parties equally, Rorik took position at the circle's edge. His transformed presence served as both guardian and symbol, the physical embodiment of a new era for Xylos, one where ancient powers reawakened and new alliances formed to face the challenges of an expanding universe. When Lyra and Kaelin completed the ritual binding, placing there. Joined hands upon the central crystal as the final act of union, Rorik spread his magnificent wings and released a resonant call that echoed throughout the forest. In response, the ancient stones of the circle pulsed with renewed energy, and throughout Xylos, dormant Kukka eggs buried deep in the soil shifted slightly, not yet awakening, but responding to the call of their kind. A new chapter had begun for Xylos, for the Sylvani, for the off-worlder who had become something more than visitor, and for the extraordinary creature he had raised from a tiny, vulnerable hatchling into a magnificent guardian of worlds. As night fell on the celebration that followed, Kaelin stood with Lyra at the edge of the clearing, watching as Rorik soared through the star-filled sky above, free, powerful, and still growing into the fullness of his awakened nature. "What do you think happens next?" Kaelin asked softly, his arm around his new partner's shoulders. Lyra leaned into his embrace, her eyes tracking Rorik's luminous form against the distant stars. "The harvesters will return eventually. Other threats will emerge. The galaxy is vast and not always kind." She turned to face him, violet eyes reflecting the bioluminescence of the forest around them. "But we face it together now, off-worlder, princess, and guardian. A combination never before seen on Xylos." A smile touched her lips as she added, "And perhaps not the last of its kind." Above them, Rorik called out once more to the night sky. Not a challenge or warning now, but an invitation. An announcement to whatever might be listening, friendly or otherwise, that Xylos was protected once again. That balance had been restored in a new form, unexpected but perhaps stronger than before. That what had begun with a tiny creature and a stranded scientist had become something neither world had anticipated, but both now needed.